Hey everybody, Professor Wells here. So we're starting to explore three-dimensional art and the methods and media associated with it. So what I want to talk about with you in this short mini video lecture are the most common and age-old forms of three-dimensional art in the form of sculpture. And there are four ways I'll be talking about how it appears. There's freestanding sculpture. There's sculptural relief. There are site-specific sculptures, and there are sculptures that are kinetic. So let's pivot to the PowerPoint, and I'll discuss these avenues for sculpture through various examples. All right. With our first slide here, I wanted to explore this concept with you. Again, I have the list of the various types of sculpture that can be created by artists, whether freestanding, sculpture reliefs, site-specific, or kinetic. And what I have here are examples of freestanding sculpture. Freestanding sculpture can be seen from all around, front, sides, back. An example of this would be something we've met already, the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius, the famous Roman emperor, from 175, the year 175, sculpted in bronze. And as you can see, the woman gazing at it, she could, in theory, walk around that sculpture and appreciate it that as an example of freestanding sculpture. Another example would be Takashi Murakami's Kiki, our example of popular culture inspired by, the history of Japanese warrior sculpture and manga. This is an example also of a sculpture that is freestanding. You could, in theory, walk around it. You could install it in a different location. Therefore, it is freestanding. Something that's also considered freestanding are the very famous Moai ancestor figures that you could find on the island of Rapa Nui, otherwise known as Easter Island. You might already be familiar with these sculptures dating from more than 1,000 years ago, from 1,000 to 1,500. They were sculpted at a tremendous size, some spanning some 60 feet, and sculpted from locally quarried volcanic rock. Coral sometimes would be used for embellishments. What you find here is a reverence in many civilizations around the world for ancestors. They feel that to acknowledge their presence, to acknowledge the lineage of a family or a clan, imbues the present, those living in present times with their power and their perhaps divine oversight. So this is one common thing you see in art history. Now, these are considered freestanding as well. Now, you could walk around them. You certainly, with much difficulty, could move one, but that's not the idea. These were meant to be permanently installed, but are examples as well of freestanding sculptures. Let's pivot to an example of a relief sculpture. Also something we've met before already, an example of art from present-day Cambodia. Churning of the Ocean Milk, Angkor Wat, is an example of a sculptural relief. Reliefs are carved generally in the face of something, whether stone or wood. You could even sculpt or carve a sculptural relief in a bar of soap, in theory, as long as you have that block upon which you're carving one or more sides. That can be done at an enormous scale as well. Many of you are probably familiar with this American national monument called Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. It is a tribute to 4 American presidents that you may recognize. and an example of a sculptural relief that has been carved on the face of a cliff of this particular mountain. So, two examples of sculptural reliefs. Then, the other example I wanted to share with you is site-specific sculpture. So an example of that would be something very contemporary by Richard Serra. It's called The Matter of Time from 2005, and it was installed in the Guggenheim in Spain. It's made up of 8 sculptures designed to fit in this room. Serra created this site-specific sculptural experience that takes visitors through passages that are varied in their length and width and feature tilted walls that further warp the sense of space, and as the title indicates, kind of warps your sense of time as well. So it's something that is to be experienced only in a site-specific capacity. You need to have all 8 sculptures to fully experience the effect, to appreciate their, expansiveness and their contraction. And that is the goal of this particular contemporary sculptor. Finally, we want to talk about kinetic sculpture. And the man kind of considered the father of kinetic sculpture, because he was so darn good at it, is Alexander Calder. This example of kinetic sculpture is called Crinkly with a Red Disc from 1973. You can find it as a public sculpture in the middle of a town square in Stuttgart, Germany. Kinetic sculptures you can recognize pretty easily because they involve some kind of movement, most often by wind, sometimes by a little motor that might move parts of that sculpture. So when Alexander Calder began making his very geometric, form-driven, colorful sculptures, another artist nicknamed them mobiles. So we might be familiar with a mobile that you would hang perhaps over a baby's crib. It moves either through, the natural mechanism, the kind of play of balances within the arrangement of its composition, maybe a little motor. So in some ways, that's what we're seeing here as well. This particular sculpture would be have an element that forms the T at the very top, and almost like a weather vane would move as the breeze blows it. So giving it a dynamic, kinetic kind of experience. I'll provide another example of a Calder kinetic sculpture on our module page after this video lesson. All right, everybody. Coming up next, we're going to talk about techniques for creating 3-dimensional artworks.